Welcome, everybody, to the Neuromasters Show, where we uncover the transformative powers of the mind. I'm Malhotra, your host, and I'm here to guide you with practical tools and inspiring stories grounded in neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis. Now, whether you're a high achiever feeling stuck or a growth seeker looking to overcome setbacks, join us each week to break through barriers and achieve profound personal and professional growth. So let's dive in and unlock your potential.
Hello, and welcome again to another episode of the Neuromasters podcast. If you have ever had your world fall apart, whether that is through divorce, financial collapse, physical burnout, or just a sense that you've lost a sense of who you are, this episode is really for you. And today I'm joined, as always, by Malhotra, the founder of Neuromasters Academy. And today we're going to talk about how you can rebuild your identity and really your life from the inside out. So thank you, Reg, for joining us today.
Great to be here and great to be talking about this topic.
I want to jump right into it. We have a lot to cover today. And really, I just want to begin with a lot of people feel as though their identity is tied to something outside of themselves, whether that's their job, maybe it's a relationship or marriage, past success. Why is it that we cling so tightly to our identities?
Yeah, great question. I think when it comes to, I mean, let's look at the word identity. It's similar to the word identifying, right? So everyone wants to identify with something to make sense of our life, right? To get some meaning. Deeply, everyone is looking for a meaning, right? So as we as we go into different endeavors, whether it's work, whether it's sport, whether it's a marriage, they all become somewhat part of our life and part of how we show up, right? And so I think when it comes to identity, there is a natural inclination for people to identify with something that takes a lot of time, energy, money, or there's been a large amount of effort that's been put behind something, and people will naturally want to identify with that. So identity is something that people cling to in order to make meaning of things, in order to express themselves. And it's a pretty natural thing. The problem occurs when we identify so strongly that we forget the totality of who we are.
That could be especially problematic when things start to collapse on us. I'm thinking of someone who might be in a marriage that falls apart, and that has been a core identity of theirs. What happens then when you are clinging very, very tightly to your identity and then it falls apart?
Well, it naturally leads to suffering. I mean, all suffering is a result of attachment or resistance. So, although it can be quite valid to identify with certain things that are happening in our life, I think it's just realizing that clinging too hard, getting so attached is going to lead to a problem. It's the same as, when you think about when you get a pet, right? What happens over a period of time? We get very attached to the pet, and fairly so, right? There's a lot of emotion involved in the care that we put in, the feelings we get. And so one day, eventually, all pets pass away, and as you know, a lot of people suffer a lot, right? So it's similar to that. If you're identifying with something so deeply, it's going to lead to a feeling of loss, right? Most people are fearful of less, loss, or never. Now we have enough things to worry about as it is, and now and this particularly shows up with in relation to one's professions. I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, and it all comes back to the linguistics. We don't say I am hand, we say we have a hand. But quite commonly we say things preceded by I am. And the more we say that, the more it reinforces the identity. I am a lawyer. Well, you're qualified in law. You're doing legal work. That's your profession. But is that you? Because moment it's you, once it's taken away, who are you? And I think that's the problem people have when it comes to identifying too strongly or getting, clinging to an identity and nothing else.
That can particularly lead to suffering if you cling to something that has already gone. And I imagine you see that a lot with people that you work with. We could see that just in life. You identify very strongly with one part of who you are, and then that part is gone, and you
Yeah.
still don't want to let that go.
Exactly. I think that's the human condition. Pretty shortly, we identify with things, and then if they're no longer present, they're no longer true. It leads to all sorts of friction. I mean, you think about what's happening in the world right now. Here's what's happening, right? You may have heard of the saying, "The only constant is change." So, what's the purpose of this whole discussion and everything else we do? Is our goal is for more people to expect change, to be prepared for change, to be able to deal with change, and to be able to dance with uncertainty, because it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. You know what happened during COVID. um, so I think I like to think of it as a whole of a life as an ongoing preparation. I think we cling so hard to things that used to be, things that have happened in the past, the whole line, good old days. And the rate of change we're about to experience now in the world, the percentage rate of change is going to be higher than the last 1,000 years combined. And if people are, this is a very appropriate conversation right now. If someone is, I mean, we talk about identity, but even ideas. If we cling too hard to how things used to be, we will always resist what's coming up. Now, sure, some of those things that are changing arguably are problematic, but we can only do what we can do, and that is to how to respond to change. And that relates directly back to this is a great discussion right now. Who do you identify as? See, there's a line I was going to say, anything you can conceive you are more than that. Here's the problem: with our conscious mind alone, we cannot even comprehend the totality of who we are. We're not just the mind, we're not just the body, we're not just the spirit or soul. We're all of that combined, and we are more because we have this thing called consciousness.
Often people will, we talk about clinging to things, particularly from the past. Maybe something happened in the past, some event, significant event, but an event, and they're almost reliving it again and again. And you've said this before, you've written in your book, when you replay those, your nervous system doesn't know that this is in the past. It is living it like it is in the present. And so you are experiencing it again and again and again. How can you, maybe what are the signs that someone is stuck in one of those loops where they're reliving an event again and again?
Well, it's a very simple test. If you can think of something that happened in the past and you feel the same emotions as you did when that event occurred, then the event is alive. And like you said, the brain or our mind does not know the difference between real and imagined. So if we find ourselves consciously or unconsciously, use this phrase, right, thinking about the event. Technically speaking, though, when you're thinking about the event, you could be reliving the event. Now, this does tie in nicely to the identity point we're speaking about today. We can have negative significant emotional events, but we can also have positive significant emotional events. So when we are not wanting to let something go, that means we have a sufficient amount of positive emotional events connected to that idea or identity. So that links in nicely, because if we had a lot of, if something was, if I was identified as something, as a, say it was a marriage, as a husband, as a partner, that means, and if I'm feeling a lot of resistance now that I'm not, right, I'm feeling a loss of my own identity, my own worth. It is possible there is a lot of positive significant events within that identity that I'm unwilling to let go of. So it can apply both ways, really. I mean, what we are trying to say here is that you are not your history, you are not just your relationships, you are not just the events you were part of. You're not all of that. You're always more than that. And that will allow people to move forward because you can recreate with with the neurology you have now. You can recreate it differently through the lessons and the learnings. Um, so I often hear myself, say I'm a trainer, right? I'm a
Yeah.
coach, I'm a speaker. And sometimes we say that publicly, but I know I have trained myself enough to know I'm not just any of those. Those are functions I carry. We are different to the functions we do, the roles we take. That way, I'm a husband too, I'm a father too. But all of those are my functions, and there are some other functions that I'm yet to, enact in the future. And that's another thing with identity. If you only identify with certain things, you could be limiting yourself with new ideas and new identities and new roles and new functions that you're yet to play in your life. I love being fluid in this area. I love being expansive, right? Open to expansion because anything you can conceive you are more than that. That's the story that one should run.
Your identity can uh, almost keep you trapped in a way. Just listening to you speak about this, if you identify too strongly with something, you may think when a new opportunity comes along, you may think, well, I can't do that because I am this, whatever that happens to be. So do you find that people often get stuck in that kind of thinking that, oh, I could never own my own business because I'm not that kind of person.
Absolutely.
I'm this kind of
Absolutely.
person.
You've hit the right point here. It's a very important topic, this. We will never exceed our identity. So there's an automatic, and that's another reason why linguistically it's so important to not be absolute, right? So not say I am this. And one of the more practical ways that I share with a lot of my clients and students is stand for an. Let's take an example here, right? You're not an introvert. You leaning towards introversion. That's where your familiar home is. That's where you go to more of the time. The moment you said, I'm mostly introverted, I keep to myself, I keep to my inner world. I'm generally, however, I can also be extroverted. And I love that. I adopted this many, many years ago to say, well, I am this and I can be that. You think about it, if you're a business owner, if is introversion important in business? Oh, hell yeah. One of the most important things, you need time for reflection. So if you're not introverted at all, you're not going to get the lessons. You're not going to be able to think about things. You're not going to be able to be creative enough. Having said that, if you're in business and if you have no extroversion, you have an automatic cap. So stand for an. So think about all of the things you identify as. Think of the opposite of that. Can you also take on some of the characteristics as required? This is the best piece of advice I can give. This I've adopted that with myself. I've taught this to a lot of people, and the easiest way to remember that is stand for an.
Is that something that listeners can do just physically on their own when they're, in other words, maybe just talking to themselves? Because you nailed it. When you're talking to someone else and they ask, who are you? We often answer what we do
Mhm.
before we answer, but we frame it as who we are. Who are you? And you give your role, whatever your role is.
Mm.
Do you advise people to think in those terms, but then add and? So, okay, you are a spouse, you are a parent, and what else? And what else to continue to open that identity up? Or is it to give some nuance to, in your example, if someone feels as though they're always introverted, to give some nuance and some space for them to broaden who they are?
I think conversationally, it's quite natural for people to, if asked as to, who are you? Who is Reg? It's quite natural conversationally to respond with the most important roles you're playing. It's quite natural. It's like, oh, I'm a 46-year-old father of two. I'm a business owner. I'm a teacher in this field, and I am someone who's grown grown up with adversity and found my way out of it. And of course, I'm always pushing new barriers, and I'm always looking to grow and learn and expand both personally and professionally. So that's one way to respond. So it's natural for people to go to the most important roles, but as long as you as a person have had this conversation with yourself, you have realized, you have determined that I am more than my functions, then that's a great place to start. So I would recommend to people, take out a piece of paper, notebook, whatever, write down all of the things you identify as, all of them, which you've said, you know, casually or deeply. This is, if you asked yourself who you are, write down all the things. I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a worker, I'm a entrepreneur. Write all of this. I'm shy, I'm not a technology person, I'm a people person, I'm not a people person. All of the things you say about yourself, put all of them on paper first. I think that would be a tremendous exercise. And then ask yourself, how many of these identifications are serving you? How many of them are allowing you to move towards where you want to go? And how many of them are genuinely in your way? You'd be surprised. There'd be at least 5 to 10 that people have, that are the reasons why people are not where they are. And you need to either eliminate those or decide to put in the opposite, whatever the case may be. I think that's a great exercise. I often ask my students, what do you identify as? Please write down every single thing. And then all the qualitative things come out. Oh, I'm not a, you see people say, I'm not a tech person. Well, nobody is a tech person. At the same time, everybody is a tech person. You're holding a device that can literally send a rocket into space. That's what it seems like. That the fun. They say most people do not use more than 2% of the functionality of an iPhone. If you can hold this device and you can do all sorts of things, I mean, you're a tech person. But because you said you're not a tech person, now all technology is going to scare you. See what identifications do? So I think it's very important that everybody looks at it. Have a look at, is has a particular identification, does it come along with a limiting belief? The other thing is, a lot of these identities we get, Jim, we get them as a result of significant emotional events. A lot of them. If something happened, an event happened, you experienced a cocktail of emotions, and now you decided that I am this or I am not this. That's a lot of the work we do, is we help people go back into those events in a specific visualization way, and then disconnect the emotion from that event. And guess what? Once we start doing that, we start automatically disposing of these labels, identities. Even when a person says, and I'm dyslexic. Sure, you may have had symptoms of dyslexia, but the moment you say I'm dyslexic, that's not who you are. You are John.
Yep.
Even when people say, I'm getting even raw about this, when a person says, I'm angry. No, you're not angry. You're John. You're in a negative state right now. Go change your state. It's the I am. I am can serve you, or I am can limit you for the rest of your life. Whatever comes after I am.
In the example you gave too, it creates a nice little distance, just a gap between who you are and whatever you're experiencing at the time. And if listeners can hear that and can create that gap, I imagine that it's almost a remove, and now you can see things maybe a little with greater context, maybe.
Absolutely. A lot of what we do, a lot of what we help people, this is most people's stories, right? We're identifying with so many things. And we say people are not their behaviors. You have a behavior. Because the moment you create that gap, like you said, you now have the opportunity to do something about it. You now have the opportunity to change it. But if you keep saying I'm an angry person, deeply you're identifying as that. Now how do you remove who you are? So again, Very important exercise for anyone listening to this. At least become aware of everything you've identified as. What are all the identities? You professionally, personally, at home, and then have a look at them. How many of those are relevant anymore?
Some of the things that we identify with are very, very powerful. And as you've said, positive.
Mm.
Even hearing you talk about your father, your husband, a smile comes on your face when you
Yes.
talk about it because it's very positive. Let's talk for a moment about something that can be catastrophic in someone's life. They identify with being, let's say, a spouse or a parent, and they lose that relationship, either death of a spouse, death of a child, divorce. That feels like a death of yourself.
Mm.
How do you come up from that when you're so deeply ingrained in that identity? How do you come up from that? Because that is so catastrophic.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's it's come up to me quite a few times from people just in the last 6 months. I'm not sure of the reason why, but it's maybe it's just a cycle of things because we've been doing this for a very long time, and time has gone by, and people, and particularly when it comes to parents losing their children, that's been the real big one b- that has come up. And firstly, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what it feels like to lose a child. Let me talk about that for a moment. This topic has been coming up, and you know, I cannot right now. I cannot even you know imply that I know the pain, but I can tell as a parent that the pain would be excruciating. Excruciating. I think I can't think of too many pains deeper than the pain of losing a child. Right now, for someone who identifies as a mom or a dad, I think this is a deeper issue than just identity. It's how do you move forward without guilt? That's the big one because parents inevitably land up, I could have done something about it. In fact, I had a chat with the mom yesterday. She lost her 20 20 or 21-year-old son who was actually murdered by a stranger for a random reason, something very petty. And she's coming to one of our upcoming programs, a workshop, and she was quite open about it. She said, "Look, it's been very difficult. It's very, very difficult. I'm still. It's been a few number of years, but I'm here talking to you, Reg, because I need to know a path forward. I want to continue living, and I want a better way of processing it." I think that was wonderful to see. I think as a parent, she was, mix of emotions around guilt, around loss, massive loss. But I love that there is I've had a chat with quite a few parents in recent times, and one of the things though that came up is in a couple of instances, parents have said that I am not willing to forgive myself. Now I've had to have some discussions about this. It obviously gets spiritual in nature, right? For discussions from here, but broadly, no one you've lost, right? And I know this comes up in movies and so many different contexts. No one, if we were to allow ourselves to believe that there is an existence beyond the physical, no one would like to know that somebody is not willing to forgive themselves. So the discussion kind of needs to go there. But the other side of that is you could have a lot more functions. There could be other people, other things that are depending on you in life. And for you to not forgive yourself or not be willing to forgive yourself is, is not the best approach. I know I digress a little bit, but I wanted to talk about this because it's been coming up. But in general, if people have lost someone and they identify too strongly with it, it's a case of really evaluating uh, what would happen if you continue to feel that way for the remainder of your life, right? There are going to be other people, there are going to be other uh, ideas, other things that you need to be involved in life, and all of that could be compromised if you are not willing to move forward. It's about loss is a natural part of life, right? And here's there's a line that I love here since we've gone into this side of the discussion, and I think it's from Lord Buddha. It says, "Everything is temporary," and I love that statement. There is so much in it, and I think at some point, if us as human beings can remind ourselves that things are temporary. If you look at everything, when we are going through good times, we think they'll last forever. They typically don't. When we're going through bad times, we think they'll last forever. And I know for me, I always have to remind myself that everything is temporary. Even we are temporary. We have to remind ourselves, yet be able to live like everything is forever.
That can be very difficult to do in the example that we're talking about here. And I think it does tie into the identity aspect that we're talking about, is because then you become identified with your loss. That becomes who you are, or you become identified with your guilt, and that becomes who you are. And so I think some of the techniques that you've laid out in this episode really, really valuable. That, okay, you are experiencing these things. What else can you experience, or what else are you in addition to these things? So you're not locked into one way of being or feeling. Very difficult to do, obviously, but
It's
maybe a
difficult to
beginning.
do. It's difficult to do, and I also want to add to that grieving is a very natural thing. It can also be, it's something that one should be okay doing. But grieving with no end is the problem. Like there is a natural period of time. I think some schools of thought have suggested it's 90 days. Some have suggested 60 days, depending on the kind of nature of the loss. But there is a point at which grieving one needs to move to the next stage.
You mentioned that really great line that everything is temporary, and everything changes. Change is constant.
Mhm.
And yet, often our approach is to resist change. To resist, we want things to stay the same,
Yeah.
and we want to create a comfort level for ourselves and then remain there. How can people begin to be more aware and more comfortable with the idea of change, and knowing that everything you gain, whether it's your financial freedom, wealth, the perfect relationship, your children, your relationship with your children, your home, everything, your own life, it will all go away at some point. How can people start to become a little more comfortable with change, as opposed to identifying with the things that they really love and want to cling to and hold on to?
Yeah, this is a great point, and I think this is the point we should wrap up this topic with, because it's a very important point, which is that change is inevitable. Like you said, change is constant. Change, nature of the changes can be small, medium, or large. And I also want to start by saying, if you don't initiate change, in many cases, change is thrust upon you. This happens, right? If it's not COVID, it'll be another thing. And every 7 to 8 years, there is a major disaster. And now, though, where we are in history with artificial intelligence, with the geopolitical scene changing completely, the way things were done are being challenged in every arena of life. So for those who are scared of change, those who identify very strongly with what was, maybe that's the pattern you've had. Maybe you haven't found a comfortable way, if you will, to dance with change. then what I would say is look at opportunities to make changes in a small way. So it's a practice, right? Become a change maker. Look at what you've been doing and what you've been doing in the same way for long periods of time. What are the things you've been buying? What are the places you've been visiting? What are the areas? What are the kinds of people you've been talking to? So I think the best way to do that is rather than saying, "Hey, change," what's that famous saying? Go to the island and burn all the boats. No, we're not asking people to do that. Not everyone has the neurology to do that, but build it up. Change small things and then move your way up so that you are more seasoned when by the time major changes are thrust upon you, because where we are in 2025 right now, I think a lot of people are going to be very alarmed, a lot of people are going to be very scared, a lot of people will not have any strategies as to what's coming up in the next 6 months itself. The nature of work is changing, the nature of, as we know, how we communicate and how we uh, y- consume information is changing. The nature of our own roles in different areas of life is about to be questioned with the speed at which artificial intelligence is being able to do what humans did. I'm going to say that. So for anyone listening, if you've been resistant to change, if your response systems to change have been one with shock and horror and surprise, then this is the time for you to be more actively involved in making changes. Those changes you know you need to make, start with those. Then other changes that you're very comfortable with, they're small in nature, start with those, and then start moving up the scale. So when change is thrust upon us in bigger ways, you respond differently. And that's all the game is. It's about how you respond. If you respond with panic, if you respond with fear, if you respond with shock, you're likely to affect your health, your relationships, and your future.
You've worked with a lot of clients who have experienced loss of one type or another and have experienced the type of collapse that have been talking about. Can you share a story of someone that you've worked with that maybe were completely broken when they came to work with you and began to rebuild themselves?
I mean, I have numerous stories on that. Typically, people have lost a person, uh, or they have ended a relationship. They come out of a relationship that's ended, a long term relationship, um, or they've lost, not lost, but perhaps they hit a major obstacle in their business and the business collapsed and they've not been able to recover. They have developed a fear of failure, but although that fire inside of them is still there, they want to do it again, but they're very fearful. But the one I talk about is a client, whose name is John, and John lost his son to suicide, and it's been over 12 years, I think. And John is quite a successful person. He has, he's succeeded in most areas of his life. However, losing his son to suicide meant that he obviously went looking for answers. And like I was talking earlier about losing a child, I think there was that lack of forgiveness for self, there was guilt, there was pain, deep pain. And now it's 12 years and he went seeking answers and eventually he came to us. Eventually he learned about himself. Eventually he learned about how to manage his emotions and ideas about or how to process that. And the thing about John is that he never stopped looking. Sure, he was looking for to make sense of it, but he was also looking for ways on how to process that. And in recent times, John has really shown up differently, to an extent, to the extent that a parent can. He has made a level of peace and he has engaged himself along with our academy. In fact, a lot of our programs, he's there and he's actively involved with me. in helping and serving people, and that's been very beneficial for him. It's been very helpful for him, and he's actively engaged in helping others, and he's found a way to process what had happened.
When you're working with clients, are there specific NLP or hypnosis techniques that you're using to help them, well, maybe reset after everything kind of falls apart for them?
Yes, absolutely. The majority of the techniques help people disconnect emotions from past events. See, you can still if we basically we're helping people change the meaning of the events. And we're also helping people reverse any limiting beliefs, limiting decisions they made as a result of events. We're also helping people merge inner conflicts, merge parts of them that are in conflict with themselves. So all of that helps people uh, look forward. There is a point that we need to look ahead. There's a definition of forgiving that I really love. It means for giving up the hope that the past would be any different. It's about change. You cannot change the past. All you can do, if you want to, and you should, is to change the meaning, both consciously but also neurologically, how it's held in your nervous system of events that have happened in the past. Because there's always, people. You have a look at people who are doing great things in life. You rarely find one who does not have a story of adversity. The difference in them and someone who is not doing great things is that they use their story, they use their adversities to fuel themselves forward, to become someone, to do great things, because that's what gave them the lessons and the neurology and the wisdom to move forward.
If there's someone listening out there today and they're hearing this talk and they really want to change, they don't know how to start, what's one mental shift that anyone could try doing today to begin the process of rebuilding?
I think the one technique we said, have a look at everything you identify as, become aware of it, um, stand for and start looking at where have you been limiting yourself, where have you been shortchanging yourself. And lastly, for those who have experienced loss, um, remind yourself, find all the reasons that are that it's worth living. Think of all the reasons, and then remind yourself, as we discussed in this episode, that everything is temporary, and that there is always a way forward, and that somebody else is leaning on you. Somebody else is waiting for you to move forward. And also, I would recommend, the secret of living is giving and serving. Find ways of contributing towards others. All of those help us make better meanings of our lives and allow us to move forward.
I want to mention this only because it's a great story. It's one of my favorite stories. You write about it in your book. You had a client who really, really struggling to the point where she didn't know if she wanted to be alive anymore. And before she was able to work with you, you had her go home and write 100 reasons why she wanted to stay alive. And tell us about how that worked out.
Yeah, I think, the person came to us and said, look, I've got a certain condition, and I've heard about your programs, and I want to I want to enroll. And I just asked, I said, no, no, firstly, we're not, this is not medical advice, we're not medical practitioners, and we cannot guarantee any of those things. But I asked her, I said, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you want to live? And she paused, and then she says, my heart says one thing and my mind says another. Think about that. That means at some level she wasn't sure if she wants to live. right? And so I asked her, I said, before we do any work, I want you to go and write down, 100 reasons why you must live. I said, if you start, when you start writing, if you feel like there's nothing else coming, leave it and go back to the list the next day. She wrote well over 100 reasons. And of course, she eventually came to a program. But it's about bringing the unconscious to the conscious. And she found some really powerful reasons. And just the act of writing that alone helped her, uh, you know, connect with how important it is. And you see, if you keep giving the message to your nervous system that it's, you're not sure whether you want to live, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. This is not medical advice, but for your nervous system to produce phenomena in your body that represents illness, because illness, represents lack of functioning. Like the body has to function a certain way, but if our self-talk is negative, eventually it affects the body. All the cells are eavesdropping on your internal dialogue, it is said. So what is your internal dialogue? What do you want it to be?
I think that's a great place to finish today's episode. Thank you, Reg. This was really powerful. And of course, anyone who's listening, if you want to pick up the book, The Energy Cube Secret, you can always pick that up wherever books are sold. For anyone who's gone through a major collapse and sees this conversation as perhaps the beginning of a new chapter and wants to learn more, you can go to neuromastersacademy.com to learn more. Thank you again, Reg.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you for listening to the Neuromasters Show. I'm Reg Malhotra, reminding you that your trauma is seen, your transformation is possible, and your breakthrough is right around the corner. If you found today's episode valuable, you can visit our website for many more resources, to register for a live breakthrough experience, and to continue your journey of reclaiming your full self.